Hi everyone, welcome to Experience Fridays. My name is Sharan, and I run Red Experience Design. And for those of you who are new to Experience Fridays, this is just a talk that we used to do internally on a weekly basis. And when we got tired of hearing each other, we started talking to other interesting people from all over the place. And Rahul is absolutely one of those people, and he's here. Rahul is the CEO of Obvious. What is not obvious actually is how he jumped from economics to design, and I would ask him to help me understand that a little when he does get started. But just to help him out, I'd like to just call upon the people in the audience and just introduce yourselves. What you got to do this time around is, tell us your name, what you do, and your favorite TV show. All right. So let me just let me just enable everybody's unmuting of yourselves. Okay. So Anshu Gupta, can you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do and your TV show, your favorite TV show, please.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. This is Anshu here. So I am a UX designer at currently working at Jumbo Tail.
Okay.
I don't really watch TV shows much. Maybe web series. I would say Friends. I
Okay.
watch Friends. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
all.
Okay. Hani Sonwani.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm Hani, and I work as a product engineer at Obvious. And I have many favorite shows, but one of the most is would be Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
That's nice. Yeah, I started watching it just recently, actually. A little behind on the TV show watching circuit. But yeah, I've been enjoying it so far. Yeah.
Yes.
Britika Goyal.
Hi, good evening. I'm a final year student at Pearl Academy, studying interaction design. My favorite show would probably be Weep. Yeah.
Weep, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Preeti's favorite show as well. I just have a hard time with that kind of cringe comedy, but yeah, it's something I got to get used to it. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Great. It seems like I just picked all the women here. Let me just talk to the men as well. Abhishek Nagar.
Hey, I am Abhishek and I'm aspiring UXR as of now, and my favorite TV show is You.
You, okay?
Yeah, it's a show
Oh,
on Netflix, and
right. The one of the new ones, right?
they have recently launched season 3.
Right. Okay, cool. It's always interesting how everybody ends up watching some similar stuff and some very niche things. But yeah, it's always interesting how that happens. The algorithm of Netflix is something that we got to think about how that is designed. But anyway, so thank you for all sharing your TV shows and your tastes. With this, I'll ask Rahul to jump in and talk to us about templates versus. It's actually the original title was IKEA versus Architect, and that's much more intriguing. So I'm going to introduce the show, our talk, as IKEA versus Architect. Rahul, over to you.
Thanks, Sharan. So I'm assuming you can all hear me well. Just let me know at any point if you can't. More than happy to. I'll just change something I'm doing at that point. Give me a second to set up my screen share. Where is? So just let me know once you can see my screen. All of you.
Yeah, able to see it.
Yeah. Okay. There. You should be able to see my slides now. So yeah. So Sharan reached out to me. Or by the way, is the Sharan,
Yeah.
do you see bits of the Zoom interface as well, or can you just see my keynote screen?
Just the slides, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I've got it right. Funnily enough, even though I work at a tech company or a tech and design company, I often find myself technologically challenged. So my apologies in advance. So when
this is a complicated interface, I think we should take a shot at doing the Zoom interface once. Yeah.
So when Sharan, when you reached out to me and when I was chatting with Preeti, this has been something that I've been thinking about, right? Partly because I'm constantly, tinkering with my house, tinkering with, spaces that I'm in, changing them around. And of course, like many of us here, in fact, feel free to react with the party emoji if you're similar to me. I've been buying a lot from IKEA as soon as they started shipping to Bangalore, right? So that's what I was thinking about. What are the commonalities between, or what are the similarities between the sort of structure that IKEA finds itself in, right, or the space that IKEA finds itself in, and the kind of work that we do, right? So yeah, I sort of my sort of what's the right word? My sort of provocative title was IKEA versus the architect, right? But then Preeti asked me to tone it down a bit. It was too clickbaity, etc., etc. So I said IKEA and the architect. So there we are today. And the subtitle is something that is a phrase that I heard. I don't know where I heard it. I heard it a few years ago, but it stuck with me constantly, right? I think it was a very famous designer. I think, in fact, the designer who worked on maybe the Boeing airplane, furniture, etc. I think I've got his name somewhere later in the presentation, who said that design is far too important to leave to designers alone, right? And that's something that's really stuck to me, right? Because as designers, and as Sharan said, I have had a pretty sort of winding route into this field. We are often extremely protective of our territory, right? Where we're very, and for good reason, right? We've seen so much bad design happening in the world. We've seen, we've seen design being undervalued so much as well. I'm sure many of you in different ways have had to fight for your points of view or to fight to be taken seriously, right? So, we've ended up in this situation where we know a lot about our field. I'm sure that all of us are deeply passionate about it as well. And, there is constantly threats to it, right? So for me, it was incredibly thought-provoking to think about a situation where, somebody says, hey, what if, this field is far more important than you or than us, right? And what if everybody could essentially be a designer, right? Then what does that actually mean for all of us, right? So as I said, right, this is how I started, right? So this is a photograph of my living room. And, as you can see, this is not a great photograph, but as you can see on the left, right, or right, I don't know whether Zoom has reversed the image. There was a bunch, like we have way too many books, right? So my partner runs a bookstore in Bangalore, and so we end up with far too many books in the house. And we had this massive empty wall as well, which looked pretty empty, right? I think the other piece about being a designer is that you can never find the perfect art for your walls, right? Anybody who empathizes with me, please again react with some emoji or the other, right? So we said, oh, what if instead, and this is my general solution to interior design. What if we use books as a, we need space, we need shelves, we need, we need decoration. Let's just use the books as decoration, right? And IKEA sells this really nice, furniture system called, I think it's called the Svalnas system or something like that, right? and I really like it, right? It's these you can see it here. This is sort of work in progress pictures that I took of my house. So it's these bamboo poles, and they have multiple bamboo poles which have multiple places where you can place a shelf. So you can change your height of your shelves, or the arrangement or the configuration depending on what you need. And really inexpensive, right? I think each shelf was 700 rupees, and then the uprights themselves were only about 500 rupees each or something, right? So for a very, very small amount of money, you can put together this modular customized bookshelf for yourself, right? And yeah, so like, this is what I like about IKEA, and this is what everybody, I think, these are some of the characteristics, right? They have standard sizes. One of the things that the sharp-eyed ones among you will notice that there's a blind, there's a set of blinds in this, perfectly covered my window, right? I was like, wow, how did they even do that, right? How did they know how large my window was? Right? Standard sized, products fit well together, easy to assemble. Like, literally, this took me one evening of fiddling around with just, I think I just needed like a screwdriver and the ubiquitous Allen keys that they send in. Yeah, adaptable to different spaces. I don't have pictures of it, but I also put up some of these in my study as well, right? Like I said, low cost, and yeah, quick to arrive, right? I ordered it, came home in a couple of days. So yeah, I put up this bookshelf, and this is what it looks like, right? This is when I was done with everything. And as I was basking in the glow of my accomplishments, patting myself on my back, etc., you start thinking about, as we change our spaces, right? Does this make me an interior designer? Does this make me an architect, right? Because at some level, you are practicing the craft of interior design, right? You're looking at your space, you're looking at, what would work well, what would work badly. By the way, if any of you have anything negative to say about my interior design sense, then don't. I'm only taking compliments at this moment, right? But anyway, so when you think about it, you're practicing the craft of interior design. You're practicing the craft of architecture, right? You're thinking about space. You're thinking about how it can be changed. I had to, figure out the wiring, etc., right? So all of those different pieces. And then it got me thinking about our industry, right? Is there an analogous thing that we end up doing, right? So again, quick show of hands. Actually, I actually should have started with this. But how many of us here today are designers? Can all the designers react with the party emoji? Let's say, how many of us are designers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, like a bunch of us. And do we have any engineers in the house? Engineers react with like a wave or a thumbs up, maybe. Yeah, a couple of engineers. Nikhil, you're both a designer and an engineer. Is that correct? Okay, cool. So yeah, so I'm sure that at some point in time, right, you've been designing an interface or a product or whatever thing that you design, that whatever aspect of the craft you work on, and I'm sure that there's been somebody around who said, oh, can't this be like this? Can't the logo be over here? Wouldn't this color look better? I think the font size is too big, right? Like, I'm sure that you've had these. You could politely call them co-creation sessions, but you could also impolitely call them, I'm sure you could impolitely call them lots of other creative things, right? Which I'm not going to go into. So either way, right? So which got me thinking, right? What is design, right? Like sort of existential, right? And design, like like many other things, like gender, like gradients, right? is a spectrum, right? There's a whole range of ways in which we practice it, right? There's design which involves deep thinking about what one should do, right? Design which is interrogative, where you think about where you actually look at either a situation, an object, or an interface, and where you say, okay, how could this be better? There's design where it's perhaps just research oriented, right? Where you're talking to people, you're looking at how they go through their days, you're looking at how perhaps you can make interventions into that to make their lives different, better, etc., etc. So yeah, and there's other kinds of design, right? There's design where you put your headphones on, you put your favorite music on, and you really get that one thing perfect, right? You get that interface perfect, you get that prototype really working really nicely. Or it's those tiny things. You're working on a font and you get the glyphs just so, right? So there's a whole range of what design is and what design can be. And I think that it's really interesting to see that design is now bleeding out of designers' lives as well, right? And into the rest of organizations, right? There are PMs, right? Product managers or CEOs who are creating wireframes and putting those together, right? And then giving them to either engineers or designers to do something with. There are folks, there are engineers who are, taking, other kinds of components and designs and putting together an interface, right? There are researchers who are coming in and, moving not just in the evaluative or in the generative space, but who are actually, again, practicing some kinds of design, right? So I think, design is really going outside, the sort of niche box, right? And that's partly because the tools are being democratized, right? Now, everybody, I'm sure, many of you, I don't know, again, we use Figma a lot at Obvious. I'm sure there's some of you who do as well. And, it's constantly, I hear a lot of talk about, oh no, the PM's in my file again, or, here are the engineers, can we just keep them out of this section? I'm still working on it, right? So design is, the tools are actually encouraging further participation, right? The tools are allowing more people to come in to see the insides of that black box, right? Which is the kind of work that we do. So in fact, that may be a good point to take a quick pause, right? So just everybody here, what kinds of projects do you work on, right? How do you spend your time? Like, are you pushing pixels? Are you doing research? Are you building other people's designs, or, are you creating them yourself? Yeah, answers either, please feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat, etc., etc. Right? So, I've put together like this rough spectrum. And by the way, please feel free to type while I continue. But this is how I kind of think about it, right? That there's a spectrum, right? There's one way to think about the spectrum, right? Where you have what I call brain projects, right? Which is stuff that's never been done before. You're inventing, a operating system that can be used just with your finger, right? Which is what Apple did. Or, you're designing a rocket that can get us to the moon, right? Or whatever it is, right? You're finding a mechanism to refresh your social media feed, right? And you move across this, right? There's what I call the gray hair projects, where you've done this before. There's some unknowns, but at the same time, there's some boundaries within which you can work. You can see patterns from previous things that you've done before, right? And lastly, there's what we call the procedure projects, right? These are well recognized. These are familiar. You're like, oh, of course I know how, checkout screens work, right? Or, I know how a login screen will work, and I'm just going to quickly crank that out. Right? So, we operate across this whole spectrum, right? And in fact, I think it would be interesting to understand where you see yourselves. So quick show of hands, right? Maybe on the chat, because I can actually keep track better there. How many of you work on brain projects, right? Or what you think, or what you would call brain projects? Just, respond with an emoji, right? So nobody? Okay. Okay, gray hair, or maybe let's do the opposite end of the spectrum, right? How many of you work on very well-defined, familiar projects, right? Where you're like, oh, I know how to do this. I've done this before. I'm going to make another landing page, or, I'm going to make, whatever it is. And just respond with, again, feel free to just respond with what's a good emoji here. But let's pick one. Okay, let's say this is the right emoji. How many of us work on procedure projects? Okay, Anshu, thanks. Mostly gray hair / procedure projects, very few on brain projects. Okay, anyone else want to put? Sharan, I don't see your response. What do you work on?
I was trying to figure out how to get that emoji you just.
Oh, sorry. Maybe we should pick easy emojis, or just respond with BP, GH, or PP. Yeah.
I think I'm on all three.
Yeah, all three. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too, right? Because we don't have to be confined to any one of these. And in fact, when we're not, I think the rest of what we're talking about becomes far more relevant, right? So yeah, it's really important to figure out where we end up spending our time, right? Where on this vast spectrum of design, and I've made it a very simple sort of one-dimensional axis here, right? But it isn't. It's multi-dimensional, right? There's you can look at it as medium as being one spectrum. You can look at complexity as one. You can look at a whole bunch of other things, right? And I'm very fond of this particular illustration. I don't know how many of you have seen it before. It's by this gentleman called I've got his name, Damien Newman, right? And he actually, I think he was responding to this idea of the double diamond. I don't know if you're all familiar with the double diamond, sort of framework for design work, where you have one axis which is figuring out what to build, and then there's the execution aspects, right? So there's two sort of diamonds that you go through during a project. And that makes it seem very structured, very logical, etc., etc. But Damien came along and said, the left-hand part here, right, where you are looking at, what should I build, putting together those answers in the form of insights, right, where you're prototyping stuff, where you're conceptualizing stuff. That's super messy, right? That's really, really messy, right? You rarely get it right the first time. The canvas is really broadly open, right? And then as you narrow down on what you want to build, right? As you move to the right side, then things get far more structured, right? That's when you can bring your, that's when you can go far more deeper into the detailing, when you know exactly what it is that you're building, and then you build it right? So the way that I'm often fond of, talking about these two parts is first figuring out what is the right thing to build, and then building that thing in the right way, right? So those are the two phases roughly of all design explorations or all design projects. And why, so now going back to, why did I start off talking about IKEA, right? In this left-hand side, right, it's really important how we spend our time, or rather what tools we use to make our time most efficient, right? So the thing that immediately jumped out at me as being similar to, the Svalna's bookshelf or the shelving system or whatever you call it, are design systems, right? Now, how many of you use design systems? Have used a design system, have built one perhaps yourself, use one in your day-to-day, etc., etc. Yeah, and when we put them, next to IKEA products, there's a bunch of similarities that kind of come out, right? Design systems are meant to have components which are standard sized, right? They fit together well. They're easy to assemble. They're adaptable to different spaces. They're low cost, right? In the sense that the system is already created, so you don't have to spend a lot of time and energy recreating, let's say, a button or a checkout flow or what have you. And yeah, I couldn't quite figure out how to map quick to arrive, but sure, yeah, they're quick to arrive as well. If you bought a design system, it would be delivered to your house really, really fast. So, yeah, a design system is, I think, a great fit to use at different points in time during, a project, right? And there's good ways to use them and there's bad ways. I think a lot of us end up reinventing, or maybe not a lot of us, maybe it's just me, right? End up reinventing the wheel, doing a lot of, detailed design work well before we have clarity about what the right thing to build is, right? So often I'm just telling people, hey, go, grab, Bootstrap, right? A Bootstrap template. Go grab the material design system and put together that prototype, which explores the question that you're actually trying to solve, right? That actually validates, let's say, the hypothesis or the core hypothesis of whatever it is that you're trying to create. And don't spend a lot of time on, tweaking the colors to get it perfect, or putting together the perfect illustration before you have clarity about whether that core hypothesis of your product is actually valid in some sense, right? So that's one point at which that's really important, because I think that the more questions that we can ask, right, the more hypotheses that we can validate. Let's say you were coming out with a product that allowed people to pay all their credit card bills together, right? Now this is a designer's favorite, so I'm sure you know what company I'm talking about. But that was a hypothesis, right? That people want to go to an external site to pay their credit card bills. And if you remember the early versions of Cred, it wasn't clear as to what the benefit of doing so was, right? You earned some amorphous coins, but I don't know that you could do anything with those, right? So how do you validate that particular hypothesis? And then how do you continue to ask many, many questions rather than, let's say, polishing an interface, right? Or what the engineering folks will call bike shedding, right? Which is that if you have a really large, if you have a really large construction project, rather than thinking about, let's say, the entire master plan, thinking about whether you need this thing here, whether you should have this major road through this or whatever, often you'll end up talking about what color the bicycle shed should be painted, right? Now, in the larger scheme of things, now that may be really important. It may be important to fit in with the landscape. It may be important, for your own self-satisfaction to have the perfect shade of teal or lavender or red or whatever it is. But in the larger scheme of things, that's an irrelevant decision, right? So it's really, so what is the engineering equivalent of design bike shedding, right? Because this is something that I think is reasonably prevalent in our industry, right? So, if we go back to this, right, at what point is one going to design detailing, right? And at one point do you use something that's off the shelf, right? That you've created before, that somebody else has created before, right? So we make sure we don't suffer from the what's called the not invented here syndrome, right? So yes, if you're making if you're inventing a completely new UI gesture, right, then go ahead, perfect that animation, make sure that you spend a lot of time tweaking your tweaking your easing curves for how that animation moves in and out. I still remember this beautiful product that Facebook had called Paper. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was a way to, I think, showcase news and whatnot. And it had, this beautiful interface. You moved your phone around, it would pan images. The pages would sort of move just like real newspapers, sort of butter smooth animations, etc., etc. And I think they spent a lot of time tweaking those things, right? But on the other hand, if you're putting together something that, maybe you're putting together a dashboard, right, for metrics. In that case, can you borrow an existing visual language? Can you borrow components that have been created already? Or do you have to reinvent everything from the beginning, right? So it's really important to figure out at what point does one go into design detailing, and at what point does one use something that's pre-existing. Right? Yeah, and why is this important? Yeah, this is the chap who said this, right? Raymond Loewy. Yeah, I don't know how you say his last name, but yeah, Loewy. So why is it important to think about this, right? In some sense, I think we're in a sort of a paradoxical place, right? If you ask people today, now, 12 years ago or 15 years ago, right, when I was kind of starting off doing some design, people didn't value design very much, right? We had to sell the idea that, hey, listen, you need a designer, you should have somebody looking at this, etc. But today the situation is fairly different, right? Everybody is like, yes, we need a designer, we need design, etc., etc. And at the same time, we still have the same questions coming up, right? You'll find, especially let's say in the startup world, which is what we inhabit a lot, right? You'll have people saying, what's the point of research? We just know what the solution is. Let's just go quickly and build it, right? Raise your hand again if you've ever had a conversation like that with any of your stakeholders, right? Or what's the point of all of this process? We've used this color for a long time. Let's just go with it, etc., etc. Right? So we're at this strange position where design is now being practiced all around us, right? There's tons of people who are using design tools, who are in fact putting together components, putting them together into products, building things, right? And at the same time, the value of design has still not been, I think, firmly established, right? Or the value that designers bring to the table is often being questioned a lot, right? So, yeah, I guess this is more a question that I'd like to throw at all of you, right? What is our role today, right? When you say that, okay, you could build an entire website with Bootstrap, or you could build an entire website or an app, right, with off-the-shelf tools, right? I saw something called Glide apps the other day. I'm sure some engineers are perhaps worried about what no code is doing to the industry, etc., etc. So yeah, what is our role, right? I guess since I had this existential question, I thought who better to throw it at than a bunch of other designers, right? And also make your weekends hopefully a little bit uncomfortable. Right. Yeah. Has anybody, or well, actually perhaps a good point to pause and take questions and perhaps ask for opinions, right? Is this something that any of you have faced, right? Is this something that you resonate with? And if so, what do you think the role of a designer can be as we go forward?
I think you might have to start picking people, Rahul.
All right. Well, okay. So I'm gonna maybe let me ask that slightly differently, right? Oh, we have some answers coming in. Yeah, to define identity, personality, domain-specific design. Yep, that's definitely that's definitely one of the roles that designers, or one of the ways in which a designer could define themselves. How many of you worry about, tools making it too easy for non-designers to do design? Anybody can respond with just, raise your hand. Is that, or let me ask you, is that exciting or is that scary? Where do you find yourself on that spectrum? The fact that, somebody with terrible taste or, no understanding of design can be making design decisions continually. How does that make you feel? Scary. Sharan says, excited. I'm just going to map this to either scary or excited. Scary, Anshu. Scary, Ladasha. Exciting, says Britika. Nice. So we have a good mix, right? So I think that just jumping back here, right? Now, for me, right, I think that the right side of this, right, where the answers are clear, where you figured out, okay, this is what we have to build, right? We have to build a app that allows you to call a taxi really easily, or this is an app that allows you to order pani puri at 10 p.m. delivered to your house, right? Whatever that, once you figured out that question and you validated that this actually has value in the market or whatever, right? I think it's really exciting at that point if everybody can then do the things that we do, right? But I think it's and I think that where our value can be is on the left hand side, right? Is in the place of sense making, right? Of saying that, hey, I am all, there's that famous story about who was it who's in a bathtub and then discovered that if they go in, then an equal amount of water comes out. That Greek philosopher Archimedes, right? So he has that eureka moment, right? I think the more exciting moment is the that's funny moment that we often have, right? Where we look at something and we're like, oh, the world doesn't work in the way that we thought that it does, right? And where we then ask further questions, right? We're saying, why does it not work like this? Why does this person behave in this particular way, in this counterintuitive way? How does that make sense within this larger context? What assumptions does this disrupt? Right? So I think that sense making, is a huge piece, or building, like I said, the right thing rather than building the thing right? Because I think as we move forward, right, tools will continue to mature, right? I saw, I don't know how many of you have used this tool called OpenAI, but I saw a demo where you can pretty much just type in, hey, listen, I want a interface, and it was able to actually create a mock-up based on you saying, I want a purple header with a, with a 3-bar navigation menu on the left and a map view as the primary screen and 5 buttons below, right? And it was able to actually create an interface which looked very much like something that, 3 years ago, we would have had to do completely from scratch, right? The other part, which I think that, our role can be as designers or as different kinds of creators, is to empower the rest of your team, right? So to all of the people here who said, scary, right? I think this is an opportunity to then say, okay, these guys are mucking around. They have just found Figma auto layout and they're completely messing up my files. How can I empower them, right? How can I teach them a little bit more so that they can do stuff a little bit better than they're doing today, right? And then finally, I think we're craftspeople fundamentally, right? Like a lot of us came into this not just to solve problems, but perhaps because, we're deeply passionate about how the way something looks, or the way that, 2 pieces of wood can fit together, right? That particular joint right there, right? Or maybe, way that two colors or two materials come together, right? And is there harmony in that moment or not, right? So I think that going deeper there is also a good strategy if that's something that you're passionate about, right? So look at new mediums, or go far deeper into this, perhaps the science behind existing ones, or becoming far better at that one thing, right? So you're far better than any automated tool could ever be, right? So that's the other part. Yeah, and avoid falling into what I call the value trap, right? Where somebody looks at the work and they're like, oh, I could have done this, or this is something that my product manager could have put together in maybe a little bit longer, but he wouldn't have had to deal with all the superstar drama that comes from being associated with designers, right? So we have to make sure that we avoid that particular trap, right? So, when the CEO comes in of a small startup and says, hey, listen, and, brings you like some torn sheets of paper, which have, big squiggly scratches all over it, and says, I've made the entire app. Now you just design it quickly, right? Are they a designer now? Right? Maybe, right? Is the PM, right? PM comes together and, they've left Google Docs and they've left Excel behind, and now they're, they're moved on from Balsamic and they're actually in our Figma files, right? Are they designers now? Possibly. Right? These damn engineers on the other side, right? They're coming in and they're putting together these React components. They're like, oh, I just copied this other app, and here's your checkout screen. Go, pass, so yeah, right? Or I've put together this login tour, and I've copied something from Stack Overflow. Are they designers as well? That's again, right? Depending on what your answer to these previous questions were, you will either say yes or no, right? And yeah, I guess this is potentially the most uncomfortable question, right? And especially for me, it's very personal, because like Sharan said, right, for me it's been a hard won battle to earn the title of a designer, right? I've come from I was a non-designer, sort of self-taught, etc. But am I a designer anymore, right? If all I'm doing is things that other people could have been doing, right? So I'm gonna leave you there with that particular question, and sort of pause and perhaps throw this open, and we can have a nice Friday evening chat.
Just wanted to add, in a sense, the tool doesn't make a designer, right? And the fact that the tool is available to everybody actually demonstrates how bad some people are. Really, you can use the same thing and achieve a bad result. It's not the tool that differentiates you. And quite literally, I think the availability of Figma, or inclusion of everybody on Figma, then pushes us as well. I think the ones that would call themselves designers, it pushes us as well, because if you're not worried about how the thing is made, you bring an opinion, you bring a perspective, and you see how that really makes all the difference. So I just wanted to add to that.
Absolutely. And then to look back, right, and think about this, I think that, and I think here is where I think Preeti was right to push back, right? Just because, and it's exactly what you said, Sharan, right? Just because IKEA exists doesn't mean that architects are irrelevant, right? In fact, there's, I'm sure, tons of architects who are then able to use some of the things that IKEA makes available and make their spaces far, far better as well. Yeah, Ritika, absolutely. Are meme makers designers as well? Yeah, are they communication designers, right? Like I think as designers we often also love giving ourselves fancy titles. So we have to be careful where reality intrudes on those.
I think Sumant might actually have an opinion on this. He's an engineering background, but I have a feeling he's got a designer in him. Sumant, you want to share?
I'm glad you think so, Sharon. Everyone can be a designer, Sharon, who can reasonably put together.
I would absolutely agree. Yeah. It's actually funny, Rahul, just as a side note, we had within Red, we had people from chemical design, chemical engineering, and interior designers all join in and learn the craft. So living proof that it can actually come from anywhere, really, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So yeah, I think that, similarly, like you said, right, the availability of the tool does not make you a designer necessarily, but it does push us to be better designers, right? We now have to make sure that we're thinking about, firstly, what it means to be a designer, and we're also thinking about the future and our contexts, right? There's a lot of course, right now, talk about the metaverse, thanks to Facebook. And while I don't have a lot of, while I don't have a terribly high opinion of that particular company, I think that it would also be a huge mistake to say that, hey, we've peaked with a smartphone, right? And our sort of digital paths have ended, or this is the epitome of them. So I'm sure that, in 10 years from now, the kinds of mediums that we're designing in, or the problems that we're solving, hopefully will be completely different ones from the ones that we're doing today, right?
I had the opposite question to ask you, and wanted to understand your opinion. If everybody's a designer, does that mean nobody is? Do you need that type?
Yeah, if all the text is bold, then nothing effectively is bold, right? In some sense.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think there continues to be space, like I said, right? About figuring out what is the right thing to build, right? I think there's two parts, right? One is just thinking about further, what is the right thing to build? And then, all these different mediums, going far deeper into them, right? Making sure that our awareness of them is not superficial, right? That we're not just, doing the design equivalent of copy and pasting code from Stack Overflow, right? I think the design equivalent is, going to Google Fonts, grabbing two things that match, and then, cobbling together a quick interface, right? So we have to go beyond the trend. We have to sort of push back and question whether the things that we're building are actually meaningful, whether they, leave the place in a better place than, when we kind of came in some sense, and what those effects, often designers have been thought of as, advocates for the user. I think we've lost sight of that over the last few years a little bit in our excitement with, all the cool, shiny stuff that exists there. So I think we have to look at, okay, how does this, how does the work that I'm doing today, or the work that my company is doing today, how does it impact the people who are receiving it, right? And the people who are not receiving it as well. Because often if we design something, it's not just the end user who's impacted by that, but there's a whole, group around that who is, right? So I think that that's also the role of a designer today. And perhaps that's something that a tool cannot replicate, at least not today.
Absolutely. Sure. If there are any questions, please jump in and ask them. But Rahul, I had another thought. You brought up design systems, right? So there's one crazy problem. While it allows you to speed up work and delivery and so on, and maintain consistency, there's the challenge of constraining innovation or evolution, which a system should have, right? So how do you think about that problem? What's your thoughts there? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fundamental, mindset difference is, do you think of a design system as a cage in which to operate, or do you think of it as a stage, right, on top of which to build, right? And I think that as long as one, as long as one does not view a design system as as the be all and the end all, right? In some, you say that, hey, listen, just because the design system says that whatever my text inputs can only look like this, or that I can only use these 5 colors or use this particular animation, right? And instead say, hey, listen, I don't want to think too much about how this works, but I really want to spend some time on figuring out how this particular screen or this particular page looks like, right? And maybe it looks slightly different from the others. Maybe it's outside the current design system. But yeah, I think that design systems also should not be looked at as being static objects. They should be works in progress continuously, right? So yeah, I would say stage rather than cage.
Cool. Any other challenges within Obvious? What are you working on next?
I mean, I think that all organizations are held together with duct tape. All my colleagues who are here will probably also tell you the same. I think of course the last 2 years there've been challenges, especially just because our lives have been completely disrupted, right? I think that one of the big ones was definitely the connection between different people who were not perhaps working together every day, and so that's a particular challenge that we've been trying to see how we can solve. What are we working on? I think we spend a lot of time kind of documenting how we work. So we have like an extensive set of documents that call that out. It's called our playbook or whatever. We're now seeing how do you make our intent into code in some sense. So the thing that we've been working on first, to start with, is a product called Pause, which basically says, hey, we have a pretty opinionated way in which we think about how people should spend time at the organization, right? We're saying when you're here, it's great. It's equally important when you're not here, right? That the time you take off is quality time that you take off. That, if you need a break, that's probably going to strengthen the time that you are at work, right? So we must make sure that we're judicious, but also generous with both of these particular things, right? So yeah, I think we're just going to look at how can we take more parts of our organization, and rather than just have them as lengthy text documents somewhere, actually turn them into products that enforce then that particular way of operation.
Okay. I'm always interested in the process story. Building a product actually makes you get in the client's shoes quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So who was the client on this one?
Well, I think the first client was our budget, right? We were pretty strict with ourselves. We said we're going to cap our budget at a certain level, and we're not going to allow ourselves to go above that. And for us, it was really a process of learning, because we had to do a bunch of things we hadn't done before. Like we'd never done active marketing and sales. We'd never done back-end engineering. We hadn't done a lot of content writing and so on. And so those are all muscles that we've had to develop over the last, 18 months or whatnot. And the other thing is that we've had to be very, very careful about not just building more features, right? Because we're good at building stuff, and that's exciting and that's fun. But we've had to say, okay, now how do we make sure that this makes sense in this larger picture, that makes sense financially? Can we actually attract more people to this? How do we get the word out and make sure that many people or many organizations sign up for this? So those have been some of the things we've been spending time on.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I know we've hit our time over here, but I really wanted to. Oh, sorry, Abhishek, you had a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Rahul. Thanks for that interesting session. That was very informative and as well as very interesting. The way you gave example about IKEA, that was something really, really different. I want to understand, since we talk a lot about designing and stuff, but research is something on which we generally don't talk, especially in India. In the West, they give a lot of importance to research. So what's your take on user researcher domain industry in the India?
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm not an expert at predicting the market, right? I do think research is where, or user research is where design was about maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, right? People talk about it, they know what it is. Budgets have not caught up with that awareness, right? So, and there's still a lot of, I would say, the other part is just like, this, I'm talking now specifically about the startup ecosystem. There's a lot of founder-led product decision making that happens still, right? Either founder-led or product manager-led decision making that happens. And so, we don't have a sort of a very mature research insight product process, right? But I do think that as a domain, we're very, very rapidly going to get to that point where people see the value of it. I think that as the sector matures, and it is maturing pretty rapidly, we will see greater importance given to it. Now, the ratios, though, are interesting to look at as well, right? If you look at the typical product organization, let's say you have 50 engineers, you would probably have 4 or 5 designers supporting them, right? And you would probably have, let's say, or maybe, in a really forward-looking company, you might have 10 designers to 50 engineers, right? Like a 1:5 ratio. You would probably have, half that number of product managers. And you would probably have, like, unfortunately, right, you'd probably have 2 researchers or 3 researchers at most, right? So you see the sort of difference in the ratios there, and I do think that there are a lot of so I think that does limit your career path to some degree, right? Because if you're in an organization which has 100 people, there's probably like 5 researchers in that organization. So your mobility within that org is slightly limited. But like I said, right, I think that it's changing rapidly, and I suspect the next 2 or 3 years will be good as organizations realize that they have to devolve the sense making and insight generation machinery.
Right. I mean, stats are very interesting. When I was checking on Glassdoor, so in India we don't have that much of opening in the user experience researcher, but if you see in the West, they have a dedicated position for the researcher. So I hope, in the future it will change, definitely.
Yeah, me too. I think the other thing to look at is, there's been a lot of opportunities for people here in India and in different parts of the world, because, we've been able to join companies globally, right? Because of this pandemic and, the acceleration to remote work. I don't know what that means for user research, because I do think that there are significant cultural nuances that have to be sort of taken or understood. I guess the second piece that I'm still not able to see very well is how in-person research can be done remotely, right? I think that's something that we struggle with, and I wonder whether that lends itself to remote working or not. So if anybody here has further insights, please do share.
Yeah, I mean, I have been doing some research stuff. So everything happens online. You have to connect with whom you want to do research, basically connect with them on the call, on the Zoom call. So exactly, it's not that great as compared to one-on-one, but just it's going in the autopilot mode. It's not that great, to be honest.
I wanted to add that one of our previous speakers was this lady by the name Deepa Bachu. She runs Pensar Design. So her company is heavily into research, and I understand from them that a lot of enterprises are relying on research first and design next kind of an approach. So I think Rahul's absolutely right. Design is where research is where design used to be 5 years ago. So I think there'll be a greater appreciation coming forward as well. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that.
Great. Any other questions, guys? Cool. Rahul, thank you so much. I know we've overshot time now, but thank you so much for taking the time and having a chat with us. It's lovely to hear another designer's perspective on how they came to it. So thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Great. I hope I've left you all with something to think about, chew on for this weekend. And yeah, I'm happy to continue interacting. Feel free to. I should have left my contact details, but I'll send them to you, Sharan. I'm pretty active on Twitter. More than happy to take questions later, etc. But yeah, thank you all for coming in on a Friday evening, and I'm sure you all have more exciting plans lined up going forward.
Thank you all for attending, and look out for this recording on YouTube, as well as for just last Friday of every month. We have these kind of sessions, so come and join us again. Thanks again. Cheers. Bye.